Dust swirled through Timberline Gulch as the gallows creaked under the weight of expectation. The accused woman stood tall, her eyes reflecting neither guilt nor surrender, only quiet resolve. Behind the gathered crowd, a lone figure pushed forward. Caleb Stonewood, the mountain man who'd kept to himself for years. His weathered face carried the pain of 1,000 untold stories as he approached the scaffold. The townspeople fell silent. They'd come for justice, for vengeance against a crime they believed unforgivable. But as the executioner reached for the lever, Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The truth he revealed would challenge everything they thought they knew about right and wrong, about who deserved mercy and who deserved punishment. Could a town built on harsh frontier justice find room for forgiveness when faced with the power of love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled into Timberline Gulch on a crisp autumn afternoon. Dust billowing behind its wheels, it came to a halt outside the general store. Eleanor Blackwood stepped down carefully, her gloved hand accepting the driver's assistance. She wore a navy traveling dress, modest yet unmistakably finer than the homespun garments of the women who paused their errands to observe her arrival. "Last stop, ma'am," the driver said, handing down her trunk. "Timberline Gulch, end of the line." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, surveying the single muddy street lined with rough-hewn buildings. A small wooden church stood at one end, a saloon at the other, with various businesses scattered between. Men in worn hats and women in practical dresses stared without pretense of politeness. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, ma'am. You sure this is where you want to be?" Eleanor nodded firmly. "I'm quite certain." As the stagecoach pulled away, Eleanor stood beside her trunk, clutching a worn leather satchel containing her most precious possessions. Among them a silver-framed daguerreotype wrapped in silk, the only image she had of what she'd lost. "You must be the new schoolteacher," a deep voice announced. Eleanor turned to face a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black coat and carried himself with the confidence of authority. "Judge Harmon," he introduced himself, offering a stiff bow. "I chair the town council. We received your letter of inquiry." "Eleanor Blackwood," she replied. "Yes, I've come about the teaching position. We weren't expecting anyone so—" His eyes assessed her fine clothes and delicate features. "Refined. I assure you, Judge Harmon, I'm quite capable. I've taught in challenging environments before." "Have you now?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "And what brings an educated woman to our remote corner of the territory?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "The opportunity to make a difference, sir." A woman approached, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Judge, aren't you going to invite the lady somewhere to sit after her long journey?" She turned to Eleanor with a warm smile. "Martha Wilson, I run the boarding house. We've prepared a room for you." "The council hasn't officially hired her yet, Martha," Judge Harmon said. "Well, she'll need somewhere to stay regardless," Martha replied firmly. "Come along, dear, you look dead on your feet." As they walked, Martha pointed out the town's features. "That's where the school building stands, or stood rather. Roof collapsed last winter. The children have been using the church when Pastor Williams isn't preaching." "I see," Eleanor said, noting the dilapidated structure. "It will need significant repairs. If the council approves you, that is," Martha said. "Judge Harmon runs things tight around here." At the boarding house, Eleanor was shown to a small but clean room. When finally alone, she locked the door and sank onto the bed, tension draining from her shoulders. From her satchel, she withdrew the daguerreotype, fingers tracing the image beneath the glass. "I'll make a home for us," she whispered. "A safe place." The next morning, Eleanor presented herself before the town council, 5 men seated at a table in the makeshift courthouse, Judge Harmon at the center. "Miss Blackwood, your credentials are impressive," Judge Harmon began, "but I must question why someone of your background chooses such a remote posting. I believe education is a calling, sir. Children everywhere deserve quality teaching." And you have no family obligations? No husband? Another councilman asked. I am unattached, sir, free to devote myself to my pupils. After further questioning, the council conferred briefly before Judge Harmon announced, the position is yours conditionally. We'll observe your progress for 3 months. Eleanor spent the following weeks establishing herself. The children approached their new teacher with curious caution, but her patient manner and engaging lessons soon won them over. The adults remained wary. A refined, educated woman alone was an oddity that invited speculation. One afternoon, as Eleanor assessed the school building repairs, a tall figure emerged from the tree line, carrying a load of lumber. His buckskin jacket and long hair marked him as different from the townsmen. When he set down the lumber, she noticed the intricate beadwork adorning his leather belt pouch, tiny turquoise and white beads forming a pattern of mountains and stars. Mr. Stonewood brings supplies from his sawmill, Martha explained later. Keeps to himself, mostly lives up in the mountains. He seems different from the others, Eleanor observed. Caleb walked a different path after the war. Some say he went native, living with the Apache for a time. Martha lowered her voice. Judge Harmon doesn't approve, but even he can't deny we need the lumber. That night, Eleanor removed the daguerreotype again, speaking softly to the image as if it could hear. We might belong here, she said, if they let us. The mountain cabin stood in a small clearing, smoke curling from its stone chimney into the crisp morning air. Inside, Caleb Stonewood moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire before reaching for the copper kettle that had been his father's. The worn metal bore the patina of decades, its handle wrapped in rawhide for easier grip. This kettle had traveled with him through war, wilderness, and the long journey back to something resembling peace. Caleb poured steaming water over ground coffee beans, the rich aroma filling the cabin. Through the window he observed a deer at the edge of the clearing, alert but unafraid. He'd earned that trust through years of respectful coexistence. A soft whistle from the tree line announced a visitor before footsteps became audible. Running Bear emerged from the pines, his weathered face creased in a smile that deepened the lines around his eyes. Though now in his 70s, the Apache elder moved with the quiet grace of a much younger man. Your kettle sings again today, Running Bear said, accepting a tin cup of coffee with both hands. You have slept poorly. It wasn't a question. After 15 years of friendship, Running Bear read Caleb as easily as Caleb read the forest. Dreams, Caleb admitted. The old ones, Running Bear nodded. The past walks with us, always. But today you have new thoughts troubling your spirit. Caleb leaned against the rough-hewn table, considering his words. A new teacher arrived in town. A woman. Running Bear's expression remained neutral, though his eyes held a knowing glint. And this disturbs your peace. She's not like the others in Timberline, Caleb. There's something in her eyes, something familiar. The look of one who has traveled far from home, perhaps. Caleb nodded. He had recognized that quality immediately. The awareness, the careful observation, the way she held herself, as if prepared to defend or flee at any moment. He had carried that same vigilance since the war. I'm bringing lumber for the schoolhouse repairs tomorrow, Caleb said. Running Bear sipped his coffee silently. After a moment he said, Judge Harmon sent riders to our camp yesterday. Claims some cattle are missing. Caleb's jaw tightened. Are they? No, but truth matters little to him. He seeks reasons to push us further from traditional hunting grounds. I'll speak with him. Your words carry little weight with him, my friend. He sees ye as neither white nor Apache, a man without a people. Then I'm the perfect mediator, Caleb replied with a grim smile. They finished their coffee in companionable silence before Running Bear rose to leave. At the door he paused. Morning Star asks when you will bring more of the willow bark. Her supply runs low. Tell her I'll gather some today. I'll bring it to the river crossing tomorrow. After Running Bear departed, Caleb collected his tools, a sharp knife, leather pouches, and a wooden box containing small glass vials. The box was carefully crafted, its lid inlaid with a pattern of mountains fashioned from darker wood. Inside, each compartment held different medicines. Some learned from Running Bear's people, others from his grandmother's teachings. As he worked through the afternoon, harvesting willow bark and sorting medicinal plants, Caleb's thoughts returned to the new schoolteacher. Something about her stirred memories he'd rather leave buried. Not the violent ones from war, but earlier, gentler recollections of a time when he had believed in possibilities beyond survival. The next morning, Caleb loaded lumber onto his wagon and made the rare journey into town. He typically avoided timberline except when necessary, preferring the honest company of forest and mountains to the suspicious glances of townspeople. As he approached the schoolhouse, he saw her, the teacher, directing a few older boys in clearing debris. She wore a simple dress with sleeves rolled to the elbows, her hair practically pinned back. When she turned and noticed him, her expression shifted from surprise to cautious assessment. "Mr. Stonewood," she said, "I was told you might bring lumber." "Miss Blackwood," he nodded, jumping down from the wagon. "You know my name." "Small town," he began unloading the lumber. "News travels. And what news travels about me, I wonder?" Her directness surprised him. Townsfolk typically approached him obliquely, if at all. "That you speak your mind," he replied. "That the children already respect you. That Judge Harmon hasn't decided what to make of you yet." She studied him with intelligent eyes. "And you, Mr. Stonewood, have you decided?" Caleb met her gaze. "I reckon people deserve to be judged by their actions, not rumors." A boy of about 10 approached hesitantly. "Uncle Caleb, Miss Blackwood says I should help with the lumber." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly at uncle. "Thomas is my sister's boy," Caleb explained. "She passed 3 winters ago." "I'm sorry," she said, and he could tell she meant it. Together they worked until midday, when Eleanor called a break. As Thomas ran to fetch water, she turned to Caleb. "Judge Harmon mentioned you have connections with the Apache people." Caleb tensed. "Is that a problem for you, Miss Blackwood?" "On the contrary," she replied quietly. "I believe we can learn much from those different from ourselves." For the first time in years, Caleb felt a flicker of something he'd long abandoned, hope that not everyone shared the prejudices that had shaped his isolation. Chalk dust danced in the morning sunlight streaming through the newly repaired schoolhouse windows. Eleanor stood before her students, 23 children of various ages, seated on rough-hewn benches. On her desk sat a worn, leather-bound copy of The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. Its pages yellowed with age and marked with countless notes in the margins. This treasured book had accompanied her through her own education and now served as both teaching tool and talisman. "Today," Eleanor said, "we'll continue our exploration of survival." Robinson Crusoe found himself alone on an island, much like how the first settlers here found themselves in a wilderness. "My pa says it wasn't wilderness," piped up Abigail Johnson, a freckled 10-year-old. "He says people already lived here." Eleanor nodded. "You're absolutely right, Abigail. The Apache and other tribes knew this land intimately. Perhaps that's our first lesson. We should never assume we're the first to discover something." From the back of the room, Thomas Stonewood watched with cautious interest. Unlike the other children, he rarely volunteered answers, though his written work showed remarkable intelligence. "Thomas," Eleanor called gently, "would you read the passage I've marked?" The boy hesitated, then stood. His reading was halting at first, but as the words flowed, his confidence grew. The other children listened attentively, a marked change from their initial treatment of the mountain boy. As noon approached, Eleanor dismissed the younger children, while keeping the older ones for advanced lessons. Thomas lingered after the others left. "Miss Blackwood," he said quietly, "Uncle Caleb knows a lot about surviving in the wild, more than this book even." Eleanor smiled. "I believe that, Thomas. People like your uncle possess knowledge that can't be found in books. He could teach us sometime, if you asked him." She considered this. "Would he be willing, do you think?" Thomas shrugged. "He doesn't come to town much, but he might for teaching. That evening, as Eleanor recorded the day's progress in her lesson book, a knock at the schoolhouse door startled her. Judge Harmon entered without waiting for an invitation. "Working late, Miss Blackwood," he observed, glancing around the classroom. "Preparing tomorrow's lessons, Judge." She discreetly closed her personal notes. "I've had reports about your teaching." He paced slowly, examining the children's work displayed on the walls. "Some parents are concerned about certain subjects you've introduced." "Which subjects concern them?" "Native customs, for one. Several children have come home asking about Apache medicinal practices." Eleanor straightened. "We discussed how early settlers often learn survival skills from indigenous peoples. It's historical fact. Facts can be selective, Miss Blackwood." He paused at Thomas's drawing of local plants, labeled with both English and Apache names. "I notice young Stonewood is receiving special attention. Thomas is gifted. He has knowledge of this region's natural resources that could benefit everyone. Knowledge from his uncle, no doubt." Judge Harmon's tone hardened. "You may not understand the delicate balance we maintain here. Caleb Stonewood's influence on the boy is already problematic, because he teaches him about plants, because he teaches him to question where his loyalties should lie." The judge turned to face her directly. "This community has standards, Miss Blackwood. Your position remains probationary." After he left, Eleanor pressed her hands against the desk to steady herself. She'd encountered men like Harmon before, men who wielded authority as a weapon. Drawing a deep breath, she reached for her book, finding comfort in its familiar weight. The following afternoon, Eleanor was surprised to find Caleb waiting outside the schoolhouse. After classes ended, he stood apart from the other parents, hat in hand. "Mr. Stonewood," she acknowledged. "Thomas did exceptionally well in his studies today." "That's good to hear." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Thomas says you're teaching about survival skills. I believe practical knowledge is as important as books." He nodded. "Thomas also mentioned you might want someone to show the children about local plants. Their use." Eleanor glanced toward Judge Harmon's office across the street. "I would, though not everyone approves of such lessons. I reckon disapproval is something we both understand." A hint of a smile touched his eyes. "Saturday morning, if you bring the children to the meadow past Wilson's farm, I could show them some things. If you think it proper, I think it would be valuable," Eleanor replied. "Very valuable indeed." That night, Eleanor added a new entry to her lesson plan. As she wrote, she found herself drawing small sketches of mountain flowers in the margins, something she hadn't done since before her life had shattered. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. From her window she could see the distant mountains where Caleb made his home. She wondered what forces had driven him to seek solitude, just as circumstances had forced her to flee. Different paths, perhaps, but both leading to this remote corner of the world where judgment and safety hung in a precarious balance. Dawn light filtered through pine branches as Eleanor led her students along the forest path. Despite some parents' reservations, curiosity had won out, and nearly all her pupils had obtained permission for this special Saturday lesson. Thomas walked slightly ahead, clearly comfortable in these woods. "Just beyond that ridge," he pointed. Uncle Caleb said to meet him there. They crested the hill to find Caleb waiting in a small clearing. Beside him stood an Apache woman, her black hair streaked with silver, her dark eyes watchful. Around her neck hung a medicine pouch crafted from deer hide, adorned with intricate beadwork and a single eagle eagle, a symbol of her status and wisdom among her people. "This is Morning Star," Caleb introduced her. "She's agreed to show you things about healing plants that I never could." The children stared, many having never spoken to an Apache before. Morning Star smiled gently, the warmth reaching her eyes. "Today we learn together," she said in accented but clear English. "The earth provides medicine for all who know how to ask." She led them through the meadow, stopping to identify plants: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, pine needles rich in things the body needs during winter. The children's initial shyness gave way to curiosity, especially when Morning Star invited them to taste a sweet root. Eleanor watched, captivated not just by the knowledge, but by the woman's dignified presence. Caleb moved between groups, translating certain concepts Morning Star expressed better in her native tongue. "You've known her long?" Eleanor asked, quietly. "She saved my life," Caleb replied. "After the war I wandered half dead from wounds and fever. Morning Star found me, treated me when her people had every reason to let me die." "Why did she help you?" I asked her once. His voice softened. "She said she saw something worth saving." Morning Star approached them, her eyes lingering on Eleanor with curious intensity. "You carry burdens," she said simply. "Some in body, some in spirit." Eleanor tensed. "We all have our burdens." "Yes, but yours grows heavier each day." Morning Star glanced toward the children. "The boy with your eyes is gifted. He sees patterns others miss." Eleanor followed her gaze to Thomas, who was carefully sketching a plant in a small notebook. "He's not mine," Eleanor corrected. "He's Caleb's nephew." Morning Star's expression remained unchanged. "I speak of connections beyond blood." She turned to Caleb. "I need more plants. The children will help me gather." As Morning Star led the students deeper into the meadow, Caleb turned to Eleanor. "She doesn't usually take to strangers," he said. "Especially not from town." "Is that a compliment, Mr. Stonewood?" A rare smile crossed his face. "From Morning Star?" "The highest kind." Later, as the children sorted their collected specimens, Morning Star beckoned Eleanor to follow her to a small stream. "You are unwell," she stated. "I'm perfectly fine," Eleanor protested. Morning Star shook her head. "The sickness comes at night. I see it in your eyes." Eleanor hesitated, then admitted, "I haven't been sleeping well." Without asking permission, Morning Star pressed a weathered hand to Eleanor's forehead, then examined her eyes closely. "Dreams trouble you, and memories." She reached into her pouch and withdrew a small bundle of dried leaves. "Steep these before sleep. They will quiet the mind without dulling it." "Thank you," Eleanor said, touched by the unexpected kindness. "There is something else." Morning Star's voice lowered. "Judge Harmon rode to our camp yesterday. Asked many questions about you." Eleanor's breath caught. "What kind of questions?" "If we had seen a woman before you came to town. If strangers had passed through." Morning Star's eyes were knowing. "He searches for something." "Did you tell him anything?" "Only that white people all look the same to me." A sly smile creased her face. "He did not appreciate my humor." As they returned to the group, Eleanor noticed a rider approaching, one of the shopkeeper's sons. "Miss Blackwood," he called. "You're needed in town. Billy Wilson's taken bad sick with fever." Within the hour they had returned to Timberline Gulch. Martha Wilson met them at her door, face drawn with worry. "He's burning up," she said of her grandson. "Doctor's away in Copper Springs." Morning Star stepped forward. "I can help." Martha hesitated, glancing uncertainly at Eleanor. "Please, Martha," Eleanor urged. "Morning Star is a healer." Inside, 8-year-old Billy lay flushed and delirious. Morning Star examined him, then turned to Caleb, speaking rapidly in Apache. He nodded and left immediately. "What does she need?" Eleanor asked. "Medicines from my cabin," he explained before departing. Morning Star worked through the afternoon, applying cool compresses and herbal preparations. When Judge Harmon arrived, drawn by news of the Apache woman in town, he found Billy sleeping peacefully, his fever broken. "This is irregular," he declared, bringing an Indian healer into town. "She saved my grandson," Martha replied firmly. When no white doctor was available, the judge's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "You've overstepped, Miss Blackwood. First teaching native ways, now this." A child's life was at stake, Eleanor countered. "Next time, consider what else might be at stake." His meaning was unmistakable. "Your position, for instance." That evening, as Caleb prepared to escort Morning Star back to her people, the healer took Eleanor's hands in hers. "You have an enemy in Judge Harmon," she warned, "but you have friends too." Remember this when the storm comes. What storm? Eleanor asked. Morning Star touched the medicine pouch at her neck. I have seen it in dreams. Change comes to this valley. For good or ill depends on many hearts. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing Timberline Gulch in white. Inside the schoolhouse, a pot-bellied stove radiated heat as Eleanor reviewed arithmetic with her older students. Through the frosted windows she saw Caleb's wagon approaching, loaded with split firewood. When class ended, Eleanor found herself lingering at the doorway, watching as Caleb stacked logs beside the schoolhouse. Frost had settled in his beard, and his breath clouded in the frigid air. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man accustomed to preparing for harsh winters. The children have gone home, she said. Caleb straightened. Wanted to make sure you had enough wood. Storm's coming in harder than folks expected. Thank you. She hesitated. Would you like coffee? It's still hot. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, at the simple kindness. He nodded, following her inside. The schoolroom was transformed in the late afternoon light, empty desks casting long shadows. Eleanor poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, offering one to Caleb. He removed his gloves, revealing strong hands marked with the scars of his trade. The town's been talking, he said, warming his fingers on the mug. About Billy Wilson, his recovery, about who healed him. Caleb's eyes met hers. Judge Harmon's been suggesting you're undermining town values by saving a child's life, by challenging his authority. Caleb took a careful sip. Morning Star sends word. The judge rode out to their winter camp again yesterday. Eleanor tensed. Looking for what? Information about you, seems like. A log shifted in the stove, sending sparks up the flue. Eleanor set down her mug and moved to check the woodpile she kept inside for morning classes. Thomas is doing well, she said, changing the subject. He has a gift for drawing and numbers. His mother was the same way. Caleb's voice softened, saw patterns everywhere. You must miss her very much. Every day, he pulled something from his pocket, a simple braided leather band from which hung a single carved wooden pendant shaped like a mountain peak. This was hers. She made one for each of us before she passed. Said as long as we had them, we'd always find our way home to each other. It's beautiful, Eleanor said gently. Thomas wears his always. Under his shirt, Caleb returned the pendant to his pocket. My sister understood what it means to belong somewhere, to someone. The someone. The intimacy of the moment hung between them, unexpected and fragile. Do you, Eleanor asked, belong somewhere? Used to think I didn't. His eyes held hers. Not anymore. The schoolhouse door burst open, shattering the moment. Thomas rushed in, cheeks red from cold. Uncle Caleb, Miss Blackwood. His excitement was palpable. The Wilsons say there's going to be a Christmas pageant. Eleanor smiled. Is that so? Miss Wilson says we need a teacher to organize it. And she says you need to use the boarding house parlor, since it's bigger than the schoolhouse. Caleb stood. Sounds like you've been volunteered, Miss Blackwood. So it seems. She turned to Thomas. Would you like to be in the pageant? The boy nodded enthusiastically. Can Uncle Caleb help build things? He's real good at making stuff. Before either adult could respond, Judge Harmon appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his black coat. Quite the cozy scene, he observed coldly. Caleb stiffened, just delivering firewood before the storm. Indeed, the judge's gaze swept over the room, lingering on the coffee mugs. Miss Blackwood, a word in private, if you please. Thomas, go wait in the wagon, Caleb said quietly. The boy hesitated, but obeyed. You as well, Stonewood, Judge Harmon added. This is school business. I'll finish stacking the wood first, Caleb replied evenly, stepping outside. When they were alone, Judge Harmon closed the door. I've received concerning reports, Miss Blackwood, about your association. If you mean Morning Star's help with Billy Wilson, I mean your increasingly familiar relationship with Caleb Stonewood. His voice hardened. This community holds certain standards for its teacher. Mr. Stonewood brings firewood and helps with repairs. There's nothing improper. There's more to it than that. The judge moved closer. You've been observed spending time with him and the boy, walking in the woods, sharing meals. Eleanor held her ground. Thomas is my student. Mr. Stonewood is his guardian. A peculiar guardian, a man who chooses wilderness over civilization, who consorts with Indians. His eyes narrowed. One might question what drew you to this remote place, Miss Blackwood, and why you seem so comfortable with those on the margins of proper society. The threat in his words was unmistakable. Is there something specific you wish to ask me, Judge Harmon? Eleanor's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Not yet, he smiled thinly, but the council will be reviewing your position after the new year. I suggest you consider your associations more carefully. After he left, Eleanor pressed her palms against the desk to stop their trembling. Through the window she could see Caleb speaking with Thomas by the wagon, their breath visible in the cold air. The boy was showing him something in his school notebook, and Caleb nodded with evident pride. Eleanor touched the drawer where she kept her most private possessions. Whatever Judge Harmon suspected, whatever he sought to uncover, she couldn't risk losing what she'd built here. Not when Timberline Gulch was beginning to feel, against all odds, like somewhere she might belong. Candles flickered in the boarding house parlor, casting a warm glow over the makeshift stage. Eleanor adjusted a child's costume, a simple shepherd's robe fashioned from burlap and twine. Nearby, Martha Wilson directed women arranging benches for the audience. A full house expected, Martha whispered. Everyone's coming, even those who grumbled about your teaching methods. Nothing brings people together like watching their children perform, Eleanor replied, smoothing a wrinkle from the costume. In the corner, Caleb worked quietly, putting final touches on the wooden stable he'd constructed. Thomas assisted, handing his uncle nails from a small leather pouch. The boy had blossomed in recent weeks, his natural shyness giving way to quiet confidence as Eleanor had given him the responsibility of narrating the pageant. It's nearly perfect, Eleanor said, approaching them. Thank you both. Thomas beamed. Caleb merely nodded, though the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Uncle Caleb made something special, Thomas said, unable to contain his excitement. Show her. From behind the stable, Caleb produced a small wooden star, intricately carved and polished to a gentle sheen. Tiny holes had been drilled through the wood in a pattern that would allow light to shine through. For above the stable, he explained. When you put a candle behind it, the light shines through the holes, Eleanor finished, taking the star carefully. It's beautiful. Thomas's idea, Caleb said. I just carved it. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the star, a brief contact that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her chest. For a moment, neither moved. The parlor door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Judge Harmon. His gaze immediately found them, his expression darkening. Places, children, Eleanor Schammel, stepping away from Caleb. We begin in 15 minutes. As parents and townsfolk filed in, filling every available space, Eleanor directed her students with gentle efficiency. Thomas stood at the side, clutching his script, his eyes wide with nerves. Remember, Eleanor shelled him quietly, just like we practiced. The pageant began, simple but heartfelt. Children who usually fidgeted through lessons stood proudly as shepherds, angels, and wise men. When Thomas stepped forward to narrate, his voice started soft but grew stronger with each word. Eleanor watched from the side, pride swelling in her chest. Halfway through, she noticed a stranger at the back of the room, a well-dressed man with a neatly trimmed beard. He studied the proceedings with unusual intensity, his gaze eventually fixing on Eleanor herself. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter night ran through her. When Thomas concluded the final narration, the audience erupted in applause. Children bowed, beaming with pride. Parents pressed forward with congratulations. In the commotion, Eleanor lost sight of the stranger. Martha approached, pressing a small gift into Eleanor's hands, a handkerchief embroidered with delicate mountain flowers. From all of us, Martha said, to thank you. The women gathered around, offering similar tokens of appreciation. The unexpected warmth of their acceptance brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "You brought something special to our children," Mrs. Johnson said. "My Abigail never cared for learning before you came." As the crowd thinned, Eleanor searched for the stranger, but he had vanished. Judge Harmon, however, remained, speaking in low tones with the shopkeeper. "Miss Blackwood." Caleb's voice drew her attention. "Thomas wants to know if you liked his narration." "He was perfect," she said sincerely. "Where is he?" "Helping dismantle the stage. He's proud of himself tonight, as he should be." She hesitated. "There was a stranger here, a man I didn't recognize." Caleb's expression tightened. "I saw him, left during the final scene." "Did he speak to anyone?" "Judge Harmon, briefly." His eyes searched hers. "Someone you know?" "I'm not certain," she admitted, "but something about him seemed familiar." Before Caleb could respond, Thomas appeared, face flushed with excitement. "Did you see everyone clapping, Uncle Caleb?" "Even Judge Harmon." Caleb ruffled the boy's hair. "You earned it." As they helped return the parlor to its usual state, Eleanor found herself watching the easy interaction between Caleb and Thomas. There was a gentle confidence in how Caleb guided the boy, never commanding but always supporting. It struck a chord of longing, so deep she had to look away. Outside, snow fell gently as families departed for their homes. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching their lanterns create a procession of light through the darkness. "A successful evening," Judge Harmon's voice came from behind her. "The children worked very hard," she replied carefully. "Indeed." He paused. "An interesting visitor we had tonight. A gentleman from Helena." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I didn't have the opportunity to meet him. He seemed quite interested in you." The judge studied her face, curious how a stranger would take such notice of our school teacher. "Perhaps he has an interest in education. Perhaps," Judge Harmon smiled coldly, "or perhaps he recognized you from somewhere else. Under different circumstances." The threat hung in the air between them. "If you'll excuse me," Eleanor said, "I should help Martha with the remaining cleanup." As she turned to go, Judge Harmon added, "The gentleman plans to stay through Christmas. I've invited him to dinner tomorrow. You should join us, Miss Blackwood. I'm sure you'd have much to discuss." Later that night, Eleanor stood at her window, watching snowflakes swirl in the darkness. The stranger's appearance couldn't be coincidence. After months of careful obscurity, her past was catching up to her. She touched the embroidered handkerchief Martha had given her, a symbol of acceptance in a community where she'd finally begun to belong. Tomorrow she would need to make a decision: stay and face whatever the stranger might reveal, or flee once more into the uncertain night. Morning light gleamed on fresh snow as Eleanor hurried toward the schoolhouse, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She had spent a restless night weighing her options, finally deciding that fleeing would only confirm whatever suspicions Judge Harmon harbored. Better to face the situation directly, though precisely how she hadn't determined. Inside the empty classroom, she lit the stove and began preparing the day's lessons. The door opened, admitting a swirl of snowflakes and Martha Wilson. "You're here early," Martha said, stamping snow from her boots. "Much to prepare," Eleanor replied, not meeting her friend's eyes. Martha placed a folded newspaper on the desk. "Thought you might want to see this. Just arrived on yesterday's late stage." The Helena Daily Chronicle's front page featured a dramatic illustration of a courthouse. Beneath it, the headline read, "Governor offers reward in Pemberton case." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she scanned the article, which described increased efforts to locate Eleanor Pemberton, who fled after her wealthy husband's suspicious death. "Looks like you share a name with a fugitive," Martha remarked, watching Eleanor's face carefully. Eleanor set the paper down. A common enough name. Indeed, Martha's tone was neutral. Judge Harmon was showing that paper to the stranger at breakfast. "Man named Lawrence Reed, claims to be a banking representative." "I see. The judge has invited several people to dinner tonight. Reed, Pastor Williams, the Johnsons." Martha paused. "And you?" "I received the invitation. Will you go?" Eleanor met her friend's gaze steadily. "Would you advise it?" Martha sighed, removing her gloves. Eleanor, I've never asked about your past. Everyone in these mountains has something they've left behind. But Judge Harmon, he doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. What are you saying, Martha? I'm saying that sometimes leaving is the only sensible choice. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small brass key, attached to a faded green ribbon. My sister runs a boarding house in Silver Creek, 2 days' ride north. This opens the back entrance. Tell her Martha sent you. Eleanor stared at the key. You think I should run? I think you should have options. Martha pressed the key into Eleanor's palm. Whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, it doesn't match the woman I've come to know. The first students arrived then, ending their conversation. Throughout the morning, Eleanor taught mechanically, her mind elsewhere. During the noon break, she noticed Thomas sitting alone, studying a folded paper intently. What have you there? She asked. The boy startled, hastily folding the paper smaller. Nothing, Miss Blackwood. Thomas, is something wrong? He hesitated, then reluctantly handed over the paper. It was a crude wanted poster, evidently torn from the wall of the general store. Eleanor's own face stared back at her, though the likeness was imperfect. The text labeled her a murderess who had poisoned her husband and fled justice. Uncle Caleb says it's lies, Thomas whispered. He says people make up stories when they're afraid of things they don't understand. Eleanor carefully refolded the poster. Your uncle is a wise man. Are you going to leave us? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Why would you ask that? People are talking, and you look scared. His young face was solemn. Uncle Caleb looks scared too, and he's never scared of anything. After classes ended, Eleanor remained at her desk, Martha's key heavy in her pocket. The wanted poster lay before her, a stark reminder of how quickly security could crumble. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Caleb entered, removing his hat. Snow dusted his shoulders and hair. Without preamble, he said, "You need to leave town." "Hello to you too, Mr. Stonewood." "I'm serious, Eleanor." His use of her first name underscored his urgency. "Reed isn't a banker. He's a Pinkerton detective. Harmon's been corresponding with authorities in Helena for weeks." "How do you know this?" Thomas overheard them talking at the store. Caleb stepped closer. "Whatever they're accusing you of, they say I murdered my husband," she interrupted quietly, "that I poisoned him and fled." Caleb was silent for a moment. "Did you?" "No." She met his gaze steadily. "But I wanted to, many times." He nodded once, accepting her answer, without question. "I have a cabin, higher up than my regular place, hidden. You could stay there until spring, then move on when the pass is clear. And my reputation, the school, what good is reputation to a dead woman?" His voice was harsh with concern. "Harmon wants to make an example of you. He's already sent word to the territorial marshal." Eleanor touched the wanted poster. "I can't keep running forever, Caleb. You can't fight this alone either." He hesitated, then added, "You're not alone anymore. If you'll trust me." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Eleanor thought of Thomas asking if she would leave, of Martha pressing the key into her hand, of the community that had begun to accept her. "The dinner at Judge Harmon's is tonight," she said finally. "If I don't appear, it will only confirm my guilt. And if you do appear, then I can assess what they know, what evidence they truly have." She straightened her shoulders. "I need to face this, Caleb. But afterwards, I may need that cabin after all." Snow began falling again as dusk approached. Eleanor changed into her best dress, a dark blue wool, with modest lace at the collar. As she fastened her mother's cameo brooch at her throat, she studied her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked composed, dignified. Only her eyes betrayed her fear. Judge Harmon's house loomed at the end of the street, windows glowing amber against the gathering darkness. Eleanor paused at the gate, gathering her courage. Inside waited a man who believed he knew her darkest secret. Tonight would determine whether Timberline Gulch would become her sanctuary or her gallows. Judge Harmon's dining room gleamed with polished silver and crystal rarely displayed in the frontier town. Eleanor sat stiffly at the table, acutely aware of Reed's calculating gaze from across the arrangement of roast beef and potatoes. The conversation had remained painfully civil through the first course, focused on innocuous topics: the harsh winter, the recent Christmas pageant, news from larger settlements. "Miss Blackwood," Reed said as the housekeeper cleared soup bowls, "I understand you came to us from back east. Whereabouts exactly?" "Boston. Originally," Eleanor replied, the partial truth coming easily. "Though I taught in several places before arriving here. Fascinating profession for a woman of your quality." Reed smiled thinly. "Teaching suits you better than marriage, perhaps." A tense silence fell over the table. Pastor Williams glanced uncomfortably between them. "I find great fulfillment in education, Mr. Reed," Eleanor said evenly. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed has been sharing some fascinating stories about cases he's investigated. Remarkable how people believe they can outrun their pasts." "Indeed," Reed agreed, "though in my experience it's not the running that undoes them, it's the new connections they form. The inability to remain completely detached." Eleanor took a measured sip of water. "An interesting observation from a banker." Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Banking, like detective work, requires understanding human nature." The meal progressed with increasing tension. Eleanor forced herself to eat small bites, though her stomach churned. As dessert was served, Judge Harmon produced a leather document wallet from beside his chair. "I received some interesting correspondence today," he announced, removing several papers, "regarding a case in Helena. Perhaps you've heard of it, Miss Blackwood, the Pemberton matter." "I don't believe so," she replied, her voice remarkably steady. "Fascinating case." The judge unfolded a document. "Prominent businessman found dead. Poison in his evening brandy. His young wife, a former governess he'd married, disappeared that same night." Mrs. Johnson gasped softly. Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably. "What evidence suggests the wife's involvement?" Eleanor asked. Reed leaned forward. "She had purchased rat poison the previous week, and servants reported frequent arguments. Perhaps she feared for her safety," Eleanor suggested. "Men of power can be unpredictable when crossed." "An interesting defense," Judge Harmon remarked, "though she fled rather than offer it in court. Sometimes flight is the only recourse when justice is controlled by the powerful." Eleanor set down her fork. "Hypothetically speaking." From his pocket, Reed withdrew a small object that caught the candlelight. A wedding band with a distinctive emerald setting, unmistakable to Eleanor's eyes. The ring her husband had forced onto her finger 5 years earlier. "This was found in a pawn shop in Denver," Reed said. "The description of the woman who sold it matches certain features of interest." Eleanor maintained her composure with tremendous effort. "A common enough design, surely." With an uncommon inscription, Reed turned the ring to reveal engraved lettering inside the band. "Never to part." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly, and she placed it in her lap to hide the reaction. That cruel irony, her husband's words even as he had locked her in their bedroom for days, as punishment for speaking to another man at a dinner party. Judge Harmon watched her closely. "We've taken the liberty of sending for official confirmation. A stage rider should return within the week with documents from Helena, including a better likeness than the current poster." "How efficient," Eleanor remarked. The dinner ended shortly after, with Eleanor declining offers to escort her home. The night air was bitter cold as she walked briskly back toward the boarding house. She had nearly reached it when a shadow separated from the alley. "Eleanor," Caleb's voice was low. "How bad?" "They have my husband's ring," she said tersely, "and confirmation is coming on the next stage." Without hesitation, he grasped her elbow, guiding her past the boarding house. "We need to talk." "Not here." They walked in silence to the edge of town, where his cabin offered privacy. Once inside, Eleanor sank into a chair, exhaustion overtaking her. "They'll arrest me within days," she said flatly. "Then we leave tonight." Caleb busied himself gathering supplies, The mountain cabin is stocked. We can. I didn't kill him, Eleanor interrupted. Caleb stopped. I believe you, but I wanted to. Her voice hardened. He was a monster. Caleb, the kind who kept his cruelties private while maintaining a respected public face. I understand more than you might think, he said quietly. Eleanor reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded silk handkerchief. Carefully unwrapping it, she revealed a miniature portrait of an infant, painted with delicate brushstrokes on ivory. The child's eyes, the same striking blue-gray, as Eleanor's gazed innocently from the small oval frame. My son, she whispered, born 7 months before everything fell apart. Caleb's expression softened as he looked at the portrait. Where is he now? I don't know. Tears welled in her eyes. When I discovered what my husband was, his gambling debts, his opium addiction, his violence, I planned to leave with my baby. He found out. We struggled. I fell. When I woke in the doctor's care, I was told my son had died in the fall. You don't believe it. I heard him crying as they took him away. Her voice broke. My husband told everyone the child died, but I know better. He sold our baby or gave him away to punish me. 2 weeks later, my husband died of what looked like poison. The servants said I did it. I ran. And you've been searching for your child ever since, Caleb said softly. Eleanor nodded, gently tracing the portrait's edge. Every town, every territory. I follow rumors, whispers of a child matching his description. That's what brought me here. To Timberline, an Apache woman was rumored to have helped deliver a child to a white family in these mountains 3 years ago. The timing matched. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. Morning star. Yes, Eleanor carefully rewrapped the portrait, but I've found nothing. And now I've run out of time. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for her hand. You haven't, he said firmly. Not if we leave tonight. And go where? She met his gaze. This doesn't end, Caleb. Not until I find my son or they find me. Then we find him first. His hand tightened around hers. Together, moonlight illuminated the snow-covered path as Eleanor and Caleb made their way through the dense forest. Their breath clouded in the frigid air, and the only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the occasional distant howl of a wolf. Eleanor clutched a small leather satchel containing her few precious possessions and what little food they had been able to gather hastily. There's a ridge ahead, Caleb said, his voice low. Once we cross it, we'll be harder to track. They had left Timberline Gulch 2 hours earlier, slipping away while the town slept. Before departing, Eleanor had left a brief note for Martha, thanking her for her kindness without revealing their destination. Caleb had made a more difficult decision, leaving Thomas in Martha's care with only a hastily scrawled explanation that he would return when possible. What about Thomas? Eleanor asked, as if reading his thoughts. He'll be frightened. Martha will watch over him. The boy understands more than most give him credit for. Caleb's voice held a mixture of pride and regret, and this way he can truthfully say he doesn't know where we've gone. They trudged onward, the terrain growing steeper. Caleb led them through hidden passes and narrow trails that would have been invisible to anyone unfamiliar with these mountains. From his pack he produced a carefully folded piece of deerskin, opening it to reveal an intricately drawn map, marked with symbols rather than words, rivers, caves, landmarks, and safe passages through the most treacherous parts of the range. Running Bear helped me make this, he explained, tracing a route with his fingertip. Apache pathfinding combined with what I've learned over the years. It's remarkable, Eleanor said, studying the detailed markings. It's kept me alive. Caleb carefully refolded the map, and now it might do the same for you. As dawn approached, the wind picked up, driving sharp particles of ice against their faces. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. Caleb scanned the sky with concern. We need shelter, he said. There's a cave system not far from here. By the time they reached the cave entrance, snow was falling heavily. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer, the stone walls blocking the bitter wind. Caleb quickly built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal. "We should rest," he said. "The storm will cover our tracks better than anything we could manage." Eleanor huddled near the fire, exhaustion evident in her face. "Do you think they've discovered we're gone?" "By now, yes. But they won't start searching until the storm passes. Even Harmon isn't fool enough to send men into a blizzard." They ate a meager meal of jerky and hard biscuits. As the fire's warmth seeped into her bones, Eleanor found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. "Sleep," Caleb urged. "I'll keep watch." She didn't have the strength to argue. Using her satchel as a pillow, she drifted into uneasy slumber. When she woke, the quality of light had changed. The fire had died to embers, and snow continued to fall outside the cave entrance. Caleb sat nearby, whittling a small piece of wood with his hunting knife. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, sitting up stiffly. "Most of the day." He offered her a water skin. "Storm's still strong, we're better off waiting it out." As the hours passed, they spoke in low voices, sharing parts of themselves previously kept hidden. Eleanor told him about her childhood in Boston, her years as a governess, and the fateful day she had caught the eye of businessman James Pemberton. "He seemed kind at first," she said. "Generous. I was flattered by his attention, a wealthy man interested in a mere governess. By the time I saw his true nature, we were already married." Caleb listened silently, his face grave. When she finished, he began his own story. His time as a young soldier, the atrocities he had witnessed against native peoples, and his eventual desertion. "I was ordered to participate in a raid on an Apache camp," he said, his voice hollow with old pain. "Women, children. I couldn't do it. I warned them instead. My commanding officer found out." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "He gave me this before I escaped. I wandered half dead in the mountains until Running Bear's people found me. As night fell again, the storm intensified. Wind howled at the cave entrance, and the temperature dropped precipitously. They built the fire higher, huddling close for warmth. "You should have left me to face this alone," Eleanor said suddenly. "Now you're a fugitive too." Caleb looked at her steadily. "I made my choice, same as you did when you ran from Pemberton. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Yours was between death and survival." His eyes held hers. "Mine was between watching injustice happen again or doing something about it." In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared understanding that went beyond words. Caleb reached out slowly, his calloused hand covering hers. Eleanor didn't pull away. "When this is over," he said quietly, "what will you do? If we find your son?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've thought of nothing else for so long. You could go anywhere. Start fresh." "Where does one start fresh? With a murder accusation? Further west, perhaps? California or north to Canada?" Eleanor studied his face in the firelight. "And you? What do you want, Caleb?" Before he could answer, a sound outside the cave froze them both. The distant but unmistakable baying of hounds. "That's impossible," Caleb whispered. "Not in this storm." But the sound came again, closer this time. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. How did they find us so quickly? Caleb was already gathering their belongings. "We need to move deeper into the cave system. There are passages that come out on the other side of the mountain." As they hastily doused the fire, Eleanor fought rising panic. The brief respite, the moment of connection, all shattered by the approaching hunt. Once again she was prey, fleeing through the darkness with no certainty of escape. The town hall of Timberline Gulch had been hastily transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Rough wooden benches, normally arranged for community meetings, now faced the raised platform, where Judge Harmon presided behind a massive oak desk. The territorial flag hung behind him, lending an air of official authority to the proceedings. Eleanor stood before the judge, her wrists bound with coarse rope. Her once neat dress was torn and muddied from the desperate flight through the mountains and the rough handling during her capture. Despite her disheveled appearance, she held herself with quiet dignity. In the center of the judge's desk sat a small glass vial with a faded label, the alleged poison, found among Eleanor's possessions during the search of her room, gleamed innocuously in the winter light streaming through the windows. This emergency session of the territorial court is now in session, Judge Harmon announced, striking the desk with a handcrafted gavel of polished walnut, its handle wrapped in braided leather. The defendant, Eleanor Pemberton, also known as Eleanor Blackwood, stands accused of the murder of James Pemberton by poisoning and subsequent flight to escape justice. The crowd murmured. Nearly every resident of Timberline Gulch had packed into the hall, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and in some cases, unmistakable sorrow. Martha Wilson sat in the front row, her expression grim but resolute. Beside her, Thomas watched wide-eyed, small-face, pale with worry. Additionally, Judge Harmon continued, Caleb Stonewood stands accused of aiding a fugitive and resisting lawful arrest. Caleb stood several feet from Eleanor, similarly bound, a deep cut above his eye, and the bruising on his face testified to his violent capture. Their eyes met briefly, a wordless exchange of regret and resolve. The Pinkerton detective, Reed, rose to address the gathered townspeople. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are clear. This woman poisoned her husband in Helena, fled with stolen property, and has been living among you under false pretenses. When confronted with evidence of her crimes, she fled again, this time with the assistance of Mr. Stonewood. He held up a paper. We have sworn testimony from the Pemberton household staff regarding the defendant's purchase of rat poison and her frequent threats against her husband during their arguments. Objection, Eleanor said firmly. I never threatened him. Judge Harmon frowned. You are not represented by counsel, Mrs. Pemberton. You cannot simply interrupt these proceedings. If I am to be tried, I deserve to be heard, Eleanor countered. Those are not factual statements, but hearsay from servants loyal to my husband's family. The defendant will remain silent or be removed. Judge Harmon warned. Continue, Mr. Reed. Reed nodded. We have the evidence of flight, the poison found among her possessions, and a clear motive. Mrs. Pemberton stood to inherit a considerable fortune upon her husband's death. That's a lie, Eleanor said, unable to contain herself. I inherited nothing. His family made certain of that. Silence. Judge Harmon struck his gavel again. One more outburst and you will be removed. Martha Wilson stood. Judge Harmon, with respect, shouldn't the accused have someone to speak for her? This hardly seems proper justice. Mrs. Wilson, this is an emergency territorial proceeding. The full niceties of Helena's courts are not required here. Pastor Williams rose next. But surely Christian charity demands fair treatment, even for the accused. If no one else will speak for her, I will. Judge Harmon's face darkened. You have no legal training, Pastor. I have a conscience, the pastor replied simply, and I have observed Miss Blackwood, Mrs. Pemberton, in our community these past months. Her character does not suggest a murderess. Character is not evidence, Reed interjected. Neither are servants' tales, Martha countered. Judge Harmon struck his gavel repeatedly. Order. This is not a debate. He glared at the assembly. Very well, Pastor Williams may assist the defendant, but this changes nothing about the proceedings. The pastor moved to stand beside Eleanor. Thank you, Your Honor. What followed was a travesty of justice. Reed presented the evidence methodically. The vial found in Eleanor's possession, alleged to match the poison that killed James Pemberton. Testimony read from absent witnesses, the damning fact of Eleanor's flight, both from Helena and from Timberline Gulch. The pastor did his best, questioning how the poison could be identified without proper analysis, pointing out the lack of direct witnesses to the alleged murder, emphasizing Eleanor's positive contributions to the community, but his efforts were hampered by Judge Harmon's frequent interruptions and limitations. And now, Reed said, approaching the culmination of his case, we come to Mr. Stonewood's involvement. Caleb stood impassive as Reed described how he had allegedly conspired with Eleanor, helping her evade capture. even attacking the lawman who had tracked them to the mountain cave. We submit that Miss Stonewood's known associations with the Apache, his history of defying authority, and his unnatural interest in the defendant all point to his willful participation in obstructing justice. Thomas suddenly sprang to his feet. That's not true. Uncle Caleb was protecting Miss Blackwood because he loves her. Thomas, Martha hissed, trying to pull him back down. He told me so, the boy continued desperately. And Miss Blackwood is good. She helps everyone. Judge Harmon's face flushed with anger. Remove the boy. Several men moved to escort Thomas out, but his passionate outburst had already affected the crowd. Murmurs of dissent rippled through the assembly. I believe we've heard enough, Judge Harmon declared, clearly eager to regain control. Based on the evidence presented, I find the defendants guilty of all charges. Gasps and protests rose from the crowd. Eleanor Pemberton, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead for the murder of James Pemberton. He turned to Caleb. Caleb Stonewood, you are sentenced to 10 years hard labor in the territorial prison for aiding a fugitive and assaulting officers of the law. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her face drained of color. Beside her, the pastor bowed his head in defeated prayer. Execution to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Judge Harmon continued, a note of satisfaction in his voice. This court is adjourned. As the crowd erupted in shocked voices, Eleanor turned to look at Caleb one last time before guards moved to separate them. In his eyes she saw not defeat, but determination. Whatever plan had led them to the cave had failed, but something in his steady gaze told her he hadn't surrendered yet. Outside, the winter sun was already beginning its early descent. Less than 12 hours remained until dawn, until the sentence would be carried out. In the sheriff's office adjacent to the town hall, men were already constructing the gallows. Midnight shadows stretched across the snow-covered ground behind the sheriff's office, where Caleb sat in a barred cell. The guard, a young deputy barely out of his teens, dozed in a chair by the wood stove. Through the small window, Caleb could see the half-constructed gallows, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. A whisper of movement caught his attention. Thomas's face appeared at the window, his cheeks red from cold. Uncle Caleb, the boy whispered. I brought help. Before Caleb could respond, the deputy stirred. Thomas vanished from view. Minutes passed in tense silence before the door to the office opened, admitting Martha Wilson with a covered basket. Brought some supper for the prisoner, she announced to the drowsy deputy. Judge Harmon said it was permitted. The young man hesitated. I'm not supposed to. Son, I've been bringing meals to this jail since before you were born, Martha interrupted. Now, are you going to make me stand here in the cold? Reluctantly, the deputy allowed her inside. As she approached Caleb's cell, her eyes conveyed a silent message. Not much, I'm afraid, she said loudly, setting down the basket. But it's hot at least. The deputy returned to his chair, and Martha positioned herself to block his view of the cell. From beneath the cloth covering the basket, she slipped Caleb a folded piece of paper. Thomas is waiting for you, she whispered. Don't waste time. She departed shortly after, leaving Caleb with the note. Unfolding it carefully, he found a crude map showing the location of a hidden key outside the window. More significantly, the note bore a distinctive symbol, a lightning bolt crossing 3 mountain peaks, the mark of running bear. Hours later, when the deputy's snores filled the office, Caleb reached through the bars of the window. His fingers found a small hollow in the log wall, exactly where the map had indicated. Inside was a slender piece of forged metal, not a proper key, but a tool that might serve the purpose. It took nearly an hour of careful manipulation before the cell door's lock yielded. Caleb slipped out silently, taking the deputy's coat and gun, before stepping into the frigid night. Thomas waited behind a woodpile, nearly invisible in the shadows. This way, the boy whispered. Running Bear is waiting. They moved through town like ghosts, avoiding the few lit windows where vigilant townspeople might still be awake. At the edge of town, Running Bear emerged from the darkness, wrapped in a buffalo robe against the cold. Wordlessly, he handed Caleb a bundle containing buckskin clothing, moccasins, and a knife. "We must hurry," Running Bear said as Caleb changed. "The woman will die at dawn. She's heavily guarded," Caleb replied. "4 men watching the schoolhouse where they're holding her." Running Bear nodded. "Morning Star has seen this. She prepares." The Apache elder produced a small object wrapped in soft leather, a carved stone pipe, its bowl shaped like a buffalo's head, the stem adorned with intricate symbols etched deep into the wood. From a pouch at his waist, he sprinkled dried herbs into the bowl. "This is sacred," Running Bear explained. "When we smoke, we ask for wisdom from those who walked before us." Caleb recognized the ritual significance. Such pipes were used only in moments of grave importance. He accepted it with appropriate reverence, and they smoked in silence, passing the pipe between them. "Now we speak truth," Running Bear said finally. "Morning Star has told me of the woman's search, of the child." Caleb's eyes widened. "You know something. 3 winters ago, a white woman came to our winter camp. She was dying, bleeding inside after a difficult birth. The child lived, a son. Eleanor's son," Caleb whispered. Running Bear nodded. "Morning Star saved the woman's life, but could not keep her. She was fleeing from a violent man. When she was strong enough to travel, she continued west, believing her child would be safer separate from her. What happened to the boy? Morning Star took him to a family, white settlers who had shown kindness to our people. They had lost their own child to fever." Thomas, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke. "Uncle Caleb, is Miss Blackwood looking for her baby?" Running Bear's gaze shifted to the boy. "Our size would no longer be a baby. He would be the age of this one now." A strange expression crossed Thomas's face. "My ma found me when I was little. She always said I was a gift from the spirits." Caleb stared at his nephew, seeing him through new eyes, noting the blue-gray eyes, so similar to Eleanor's. Could it be possible? The timing matched. Thomas's mother, Caleb's sister, had claimed to find the boy shortly after her husband's death, when she had retreated to their isolated homestead to grieve. "Thomas," Caleb said carefully, "did your mother ever mention an Apache woman?" The boy nodded slowly. "Etchery said a medicine woman brought me, that I was special." He reached inside his shirt and pulled out the wooden pendant hanging from a leather cord, the match to the one Caleb carried, carved by his sister. "May made this for me, said it would help me find my way home." Running Bear touched the pendant gently. "The woman knows this child is here. That is why she came to Timberline. But she never claimed him," Caleb said, confused. "She searches but does not know where to look." Running Bear's expression was solemn. "Now you must decide. The boy should know his mother before she dies." Thomas looked between them, his young face suddenly fierce with determination. "I won't let them hang her." Running Bear placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Brave words, but Judge Harmon has many guns." "We need more help," Caleb agreed. The Apache elder nodded. "My people wait in the forest, not many, those who remember the woman's kindness when she lived among us. Those who respect Morning Star's vision." "It won't be enough," Caleb said grimly. "Perhaps." Running Bear's eyes held ancient wisdom. "But sometimes justice needs only a moment of truth to find its path. Come, Morning Star waits with the others." As they moved deeper into the forest, Caleb felt the weight of revelation settling on his shoulders. Thomas, Eleanor's son, walked beside him, unaware that his world had just shifted fundamentally. Ahead lay an impossible rescue attempt. Behind, the gallows stood nearly complete. Dawn was approaching, and with it, either Eleanor's death or a chance at the family that had been torn from her years ago. The Apache winter camp lay hidden in a sheltered valley, invisible until they were nearly upon it. Low hide structures blended with the landscape, their smoke dispersing through carefully designed vents to avoid detection. As they approached, Morning Star emerged from the largest dwelling, her weathered face solemn in the pre-dawn light. Her eyes immediately went to Thomas. She studied him with a penetrating gaze that made the boy shift uncomfortably. "You have told him?" she asked Caleb. "Some," Caleb replied. "Not everything." Morning Star nodded once, then beckoned them inside. The interior was warm, illuminated by a small fire. Several Apache elders sat in a circle, including a woman Caleb didn't recognize. Older than Morning Star, her face deeply lined with age. "This is White Dove," Morning Star introduced her. "She was there when the boy was born." White Dove beckoned Thomas closer. Hesitantly, the boy approached. The elderly woman reached out, her fingers gently tracing his features, lingering on his distinctive blue-gray eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "This is the child." From a leather pouch beside her, White Dove withdrew a small pair of intricately beaded baby moccasins. The tiny footwear, crafted from soft deerskin, featured a pattern of stars worked in blue and white beads across the tops. "I made these for you," she told Thomas. "When you were new to this world," Thomas stared at the moccasins, then at White Dove. "You knew me as a baby?" The old woman nodded. "I helped Morning Star bring you into this world. Your mother was very brave. She sang to you even through her pain." "My mother?" Thomas looked to Caleb in confusion. "But Ma never said." "Not my sister," Caleb said gently. "Your birth mother, Eleanor." Thomas went very still. "Miss Blackwood, but that's not, how could she?" "The woman you know as Eleanor Blackwood came searching for you," Morning Star explained. "She did not know where you were, only that you lived. When she fled her husband, she was carrying you," Caleb added. "She made it this far before you were born. She was badly hurt during the birth." Morning Star picked up the narrative. "She was too weak to travel with a newborn. Men were hunting her. She asked us to keep you safe until she returned." "But she never came back," Thomas said softly. "She could not," White Dove replied. "The men hunting her were close. She led them away from you. When she was strong enough to travel," Morning Star continued, "I took you to a white family I knew to be kind. A woman who had lost her own child." "My sister," Caleb confirmed. "She never told me where you came from, Thomas. Only that you were a gift from the spirits after her baby died." Thomas stared at the tiny moccasins in White Dove's hands. "So Miss Blackwood is my real mother. And my father was a cruel man," Morning Star said firmly. "Your mother fled to save you both from him. She's been searching for you ever since," Caleb added. "That's why she came to Timberline Gulch. She had heard rumors that a child matching your description had been seen with Apache healers in these mountains." Thomas's expression shifted between confusion, disbelief, and a dawning wonder. "Does she know about me?" "No," Running Bear answered. "She has looked into your face many times, but does not see herself there." A silence fell over the group as Thomas absorbed this revelation. Finally, he straightened his shoulders with a determination that reminded Caleb powerfully of Eleanor. "We have to save her," the boy declared, "before they hang her." "That is why we are here," Running Bear agreed. "But we are few, and Judge Harmon has many guns." "We don't need guns," Thomas said. "We need the truth." The elders exchanged glances, impressed by the child's clarity. "The boy is right," Morning Star said, "but truth needs proof." She rose and went to a parfleck container in the corner of the dwelling. From it, she removed a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed a journal bound in faded red leather, its pages yellowed with age and exposure. "Your mother left this," Morning Star explained, handing it to Thomas. "Her words, her journey. She could not carry it with her. It would reveal too much if she were captured. She asked me to keep it safe for her son." Thomas accepted the journal reverently. "She wrote this for me? For you to know her if she could not return?" White Dove confirmed. Caleb checked the position of the stars through the smoke hole. "Dawn approaches. We need to move soon if we're going to save her." Running Bear nodded. "The horses are ready. 10 warriors will ride with us." "Not enough to fight the whole town," Caleb said grimly. We do not go to fight, Morning Star corrected. We go to speak truth. Sometimes that is more powerful than many guns. She approached Thomas, who still clutched the journal. You must be brave, little one. Your mother has suffered much to find you. Now you must help her see what has been before her eyes all along. Thomas nodded solemnly, then reached for the tiny moccasins. White Dove placed them in his hands. Take them, she said. They are proof of your beginning. As they prepared to depart, Morning Star drew Caleb aside. The woman loves you, she said simply. How do you know? He asked. I have seen how she looks at you. The same way she looked at this child when he was born, like her heart lived outside her body. Morning Star's eyes were knowing. You love her too. Yes, Caleb admitted, but that may not be enough to save her. Love is never enough by itself, the healer agreed. But without it, nothing else matters. Remember this when you face Judge Harmon. His heart holds no love, only power. That is his weakness. Outside, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. Thomas mounted behind Caleb on his horse, the journal and moccasins secured safely inside his coat. Around them, Apache warriors prepared for the ride to Timberline Gulch. We ride for justice, Running Bear announced, for the woman who respected our ways, for the child who belongs to two worlds. As they urged their horses forward, Caleb felt Thomas's arms tighten around his waist. Whatever happened in the coming hours, a truth had already been revealed that would change all their lives forever. Now they raced against the rising sun to ensure that Eleanor would live to discover it. First light streaked the eastern sky as Eleanor sat alone in the schoolroom that had become her prison. The desks where children had once learned their letters now stood pushed against the walls, leaving a stark, empty space where she'd once taught with such hope. Outside, she could hear the steady rhythm of hammers completing the gallows. A single guard dozed in a chair by the door, rifle across his knees. On the teacher's desk lay her few possessions, confiscated but displayed within her view, a cruel reminder of the life that would soon end. Among them gleamed a silver fob watch that had belonged to her father, its ornate case engraved with intricate vines surrounding her family's crest. The timepiece had been her last connection to her life before Pemberton, before everything had shattered. Eleanor watched the second hand make its relentless circuit. Each tick brought dawn closer, each moment stealing away what remained of her life. She had spent the night alternating between desperate prayer and composing a final letter, a letter for a child who might never read it, who might never know she had searched for him until her last breath. The guard stirred, checking his own timepiece. 2 hours, he muttered, not unkindly. Eleanor nodded. The young deputy, barely 20, had shown her small kindnesses through the night. A blanket against the chill, a cup of coffee. Now an honest accounting of her remaining time. Could I have my watch? She asked softly, to mark the time I have left. He hesitated, then nodded, bringing her the silver timepiece. Don't see the harm in it. She cradled the watch in her palm, feeling its steady pulse. Thank you. Mrs. Wilson asked me to give you something else, he said, glancing toward the door. From his pocket he produced a small cloth bundle. Said it might bring you comfort. Inside the bundle, Eleanor found a miniature Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. A pressed flower marked a passage in Psalms, words about mercy and redemption. Martha's final kindness brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Tell her, Eleanor's voice caught. Tell her I'm grateful for everything. The deputy nodded awkwardly. Judge Harmon will be here at first light. Pastor Williams asked to visit before then. I'd like that, Eleanor whispered. As the deputy resumed his post, Eleanor opened the watch's case. Inside the lid was a tiny portrait of her parents, painted in miniature when she was a child. Their faces gazed back at her, her mother's gentle smile, her father's steady eyes so like her own. What would they think of her now? Their daughter, condemned to hang for a murder she didn't commit, her search for her child ending in failure. She snapped the watch closed, unable to bear their painted expressions any longer. Miles away, Caleb led the small band bad riders through a hidden mountain pass, taking a route that would bring them to Timberline Gulch from an unexpected direction. Thomas rode silently behind him, one hand clutching Caleb's coat, the other pressed against the pocket where he carried the tiny moccasins. "How much farther?" the boy asked, his voice thin with anxiety. "Another hour," Caleb answered grimly. "If we push the horse in." Running Bear rode alongside them, his face set in determined lines. "The sun rises quickly today." The unspoken truth hung heavy between them. They might already be too late. Judge Harmon stood before the mirror in his study, meticulously adjusting his black frock coat. On his desk lay a stack of official documents, confirmation from Helena regarding Eleanor's identity and the circumstances of James Pemberton's death. Beside these papers sat his personal journal, bound in fine calfskin, with a brass clasp, in which he had documented every step of his investigation into Eleanor Blackwood. He checked his gold pocket watch, an expensive piece he'd purchased to mark his appointment as territorial judge. The case bore an engraving of Justice herself, blindfolded and bearing scales. The irony did not occur to him as he noted the time, 6:15 a.m. Dawn was breaking. He closed the watch with a satisfying snap. "Justice waits for no one," he murmured to his reflection. In the schoolroom, Pastor Williams sat beside Eleanor, his Bible open between them. "The Lord is merciful, Eleanor. Whatever happens today, remember that." "It's hard to see mercy in this," she admitted. "Faith is most important when it's most difficult," he replied gently. "I believe your innocence will be revealed, if not in this world, then certainly in the next. I haven't been completely honest with you, Pastor." Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "I came here searching for someone. Your child," he said simply. Eleanor's head snapped up. "How did you, Martha told me. She found the miniature portrait you keep." His eyes were kind. "A mother's love is a powerful force. God understands that better than anyone." Before Eleanor could respond, the schoolhouse door burst open. Judge Harmon entered, flanked by Reed and two deputies. "It's time," the judge announced. Eleanor rose slowly, clutching her father's watch in one hand and the small Bible in the other. Through the windows she could see townsfolk gathering near the gallows, their faces solemn in the early light. "May I keep these?" she asked, indicating the items she held. Reed began to object, but Judge Harmon waved him silent. "Let her have her trinkets. They won't matter shortly." As they led her outside, Eleanor felt the cold morning air like a physical shock. The town lay eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. The gallows loomed before her, stark against the lightening sky. A hood and noose dangled ominously from the crossbeam. "Eleanor Pemberton," Judge Harmon intoned formally, "you have been found guilty of the murder of James Pemberton. The sentence of death will now be carried out. Do you have any final words?" Eleanor looked out at the gathered townspeople. Martha stood with her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Several of Eleanor's students clung to their parents, faces tear-streaked and confused. Even Miss Johnson, who had been skeptical of Eleanor's teaching methods, looked distressed. "I did not kill my husband," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "But I do not leave this world without regret. My greatest sorrow is that I never found my son, the child taken from me, whom I've searched for all these years." Her voice broke slightly. "I hope that somewhere he is loved. That is all I ever wanted for him." Judge Harmon signaled to the executioner. As Eleanor was led up the steps of the gallows, she clutched her father's watch tightly, taking comfort in its steady ticking. Each beat marked another moment of life, precious even now. At the end, she closed her eyes, picturing not her impending death, but her child's face as she had last seen him, tiny and perfect, with eyes the same shade of blue-gray as her own. The hemp rope felt coarse against Eleanor's neck as the executioner adjusted the noose. A hushed silence had fallen over the crowd, broken only by muffled sobs from some of the schoolchildren. Judge Harmon stood at the base of the gallows, his expression a mask of righteous satisfaction as he prepared to give the final signal. "Justice will be served today," he announced to the assembled town. "Let this be a lesson that no one, regardless of position or charm, is above the law." Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains where she had briefly found freedom with Caleb. If these were to be her final moments, she would fill them with thoughts of what might have been, not the horror of what was to come. The executioner stepped back, his hand moving toward the lever that would release the trapdoor beneath her feet. The pastor began reciting a prayer, his voice trembling slightly. "Stop!" The shout came from the edge of the crowd. Heads turned as Caleb Stonewood pushed through the gathering, Thomas close behind him. Following them were Running Bear, Morning Star, and several Apache warriors on horseback, an unprecedented sight in the center of Timberline Gulch. "This execution cannot proceed," Caleb called out, his voice carrying across the sudden murmurs of the crowd. Judge Harmon's face darkened with fury. "Seize him, he's an escaped prisoner." Several men moved forward, but hesitated at the sight of the Apache warriors, whose presence created a ripple of unease through the crowd. "Hear him out," Martha Wilson called. Others joined her, their voices rising in support. From the gallows platform, Eleanor stared at Caleb in disbelief, hope and fear warring within her. Her gaze shifted to Thomas, noting his unusual intensity as he stared up at her. Judge Harmon raised his hands for silence. "This is a legal execution, Stonewood. Your interference only adds to your crimes. This is a miscarriage of justice," Caleb countered, "and we have proof." Thomas stepped forward, clutching something in his hands. "She didn't kill anyone," the boy said, his young voice clear and determined. "She was running to protect me." Eleanor's breath caught. Confusion swept across her face as she looked from Thomas to Caleb. "What is this nonsense?" Judge Harmon demanded. Morning Star dismounted, her movements deliberate and dignified. From her medicine pouch, she produced a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with age. The Apache healer approached Judge Harmon without fear, extending the document toward him. "This woman gave birth in our camp 3 winters ago," she stated firmly. "She was fleeing a cruel husband who had threatened her child. I delivered the boy myself." Judge Harmon refused to take the paper. "The ravings of a savage woman mean nothing in this court." "Then perhaps this will," Pastor Williams said, stepping forward to accept the document from Morning Star. He unfolded it carefully, examining its contents. "This appears to be a physician's statement, signed and dated in Helena, confirming that Eleanor Pemberton was with child." "A forgery," Reed declared. "The doctor's name is Samuel Whitaker," the pastor continued. "I believe he still practices in Helena. His reputation is beyond reproach." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Harmon's composure slipped momentarily before he recovered. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "Even if she was with child, it has no bearing on her husband's murder." "It has every bearing," Caleb argued, "because James Pemberton threatened to kill the child. Eleanor fled to protect her son, not to escape justice for a murder she didn't commit." Thomas moved closer to the gallows, pulling something from inside his coat. In his small hands he held a pair of tiny beaded moccasins. "These were mine," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "White Dove made them for me when I was born." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Judge Harmon's face. "What is the meaning of this?" "It means," Running Bear said, "that the boy you know as Thomas Stonewood is the son of Eleanor Pemberton." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Eleanor swayed on the platform, her knees threatening to buckle as she stared down at Thomas. She searched his face with new awareness, seeing now what had been before her eyes all along, the shape of his eyes, so like her own, the curve of his mouth reminiscent of her father's. "My son," she whispered, the words barely audible through the noose around her neck. Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Morning Star gave me to your sister," he said, looking at Caleb, "to keep me safe while you led the bad men away." Judge Harmon's face had grown increasingly red. "This is a fiction, a desperate ploy to delay justice." Is it? Martha Wilson challenged, stepping forward. Look at them, Judge. Look at their eyes. The same unusual color, the same shape. The crowd was becoming restless, many now openly questioning the proceedings. Eleanor's students pushed to the front, pointing and whispering as they recognized the similarities between their teacher and Thomas. "Mama," Thomas called up to Eleanor, the word hanging in the air between them, a question and a declaration all at once. Eleanor strained against her bonds, tears flowing freely down her face. "My baby," she breathed. "My son." The executioner shifted uncomfortably, looking to Judge Harmon for direction. The judge's hand trembled with barely controlled rage as he gripped his walking stick, its silver handle shaped like an eagle's head, glinting in the morning light. "Enough of this spectacle," he snapped. "The law must be carried out." "Which law, Judge?" Pastor Williams asked quietly. "The one that seeks justice, or the one that serves your pride?" "I demand this execution proceed immediately," Reed interjected, stepping forward. "Mrs. Pemberton has been legally convicted in a sham trial," Caleb interrupted, "with no proper defense and evidence that wouldn't stand in any real court." Morningstar moved to stand beside Thomas. "This boy has lived without his mother for 3 winters because she sacrificed everything to protect him. Would a murderer make such a sacrifice?" The crowd had grown increasingly vocal, many now calling for a delay, for reconsideration. Several of the town council members huddled together in urgent conversation. Judge Harmon struck his walking stick against the ground. "I will have order," he shouted, but his authority was visibly crumbling. In that moment of chaos, Thomas broke free and ran to the gallows, climbing the steps before anyone could stop him. He reached Eleanor, wrapping his arms around her legs in a desperate embrace. "Don't take my mama away again," he pleaded, looking down at the stunned faces below. "I just found her." The simple, heartfelt declaration hung in the air, a child's plea for mercy that spoke more powerfully than any legal argument. In the sudden silence that followed, the town of Timberline Gulch found itself at a crossroads between vengeance and compassion, between rigid law and human understanding. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Thomas clung to Eleanor on the gallows platform, while the town watched in stunned silence. Then Martha Wilson stepped forward, her normally gentle face hardened with resolve. "Cut her down," she demanded. "This has gone far enough." Judge Harmon shook his head. The law demands truth," Martha interrupted. "And there's been precious little of that in these proceedings." Pastor Williams moved to stand beside Martha. "I must agree. At minimum, we owe it to this child to hear the full story." The executioner looked uncertainly between the judge and the growing number of townspeople voicing support for delay. Reluctantly, Judge Harmon nodded, and the man loosened the noose from around Eleanor's neck as Thomas helped his mother down the gallows steps. Morningstar approached with White Dove. The elderly Apache woman carried a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Carved into the lid was a delicate rendering of a mother cradling an infant, a universal symbol of maternal protection. "We bring truth," Morningstar announced, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. White Dove opened the box, removing a yellowed document. "This is the birth record I kept," she explained as Pastor Williams accepted it from her. "I record all children born under my care." The pastor examined the document carefully. "It's a detailed account of a birth. The date corresponds to Thomas's age. The mother's name is listed as Ella, a common diminutive for Eleanor." "There is more," White Dove said, reaching deeper into the box. She withdrew a gold wedding band set with a small diamond, a modest ring, nothing like the emerald one Reed had produced as evidence. "The mother left this with her son, hidden in his swaddling. She said it was her mother's ring, not the one forced upon her by the cruel man." Eleanor gasped softly. "My mother's wedding band. I thought it was lost forever." The ring passed from hand to hand until it reached Eleanor. With trembling fingers, she showed the others the inscription inside, "Love without end." "My father's words to my mother," she explained, her voice breaking. "The only true marriage I ever witnessed." Judge Harmon scoffed. "Sentimental trinkets prove nothing." There are still the facts of James Pemberton's death, which you've established through hearsay and circumstance, Caleb interjected. While ignoring the fact that Pemberton's own family had more to gain from his death than Eleanor ever did. Reed stepped forward, his professional facade slipping. Mrs. Pemberton was the last person seen with her husband. The poison was found among her possessions, planted there perhaps, Martha suggested, by someone with a vested interest in seeing her condemned. A murmur of speculation rippled through the crowd. Morning Star reached into the wooden box once more, removing a folded letter sealed with wax. This came 3 moons ago from a place called Helena. She handed it to Pastor Williams. I cannot read the white man's word. The pastor broke the seal and scanned the contents, his expression growing increasingly grave. This is a letter from Dr. Samuel Whitaker of Helena, responding to Morning Star's inquiry about James Pemberton's death. He looked up, addressing the crowd. The doctor writes that he had suspicions about the death that were never investigated. James Pemberton had a brother, Edward, who inherited everything upon James's death, but only if James died without an heir. And if there was a child, someone called from the crowd, the estate would be held in trust for the child, the pastor read, with the mother as guardian if she survived her husband. Understanding dawned on many faces. Reed shifted uncomfortably as attention turned to him. Who hired you, Mr. Reed? Caleb asked, pointedly. Was it the Pemberton family? Edward Pemberton, perhaps? Before Reed could answer, Judge Harmon cut in. This is irrelevant. The territorial court has jurisdiction. I think we've seen enough of your particular brand of justice, Judge. Martha interrupted. She turned to address the town council members. Gentlemen, I believe a vote is in order. As the council members conferred urgently, Eleanor knelt to embrace Thomas properly for the first time, her bonds having been cut by the executioner. My son, she whispered, tracing his features with gentle fingers. I never stopped looking for you. I dreamed about you, Thomas replied, his voice small but steady. I didn't know it was you, but I dreamed about a lady with eyes like mine. Caleb stood protectively beside them, his hand resting lightly on Thomas's shoulder. Eleanor looked up at him, gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. You kept him safe, she said. All this time without knowing. My sister loved him as her own, Caleb replied. Now I understand why I felt drawn to protect you both from the beginning. The council members approached, looking solemn but resolved. The eldest addressed the crowd. Given the new evidence and testimonies, we move to stay the execution and hold a proper hearing with all facts presented. He turned to Judge Harmon. This is the will of the council, Judge. Harmon's face contorted with rage. This is my court. I decide. Actually, the councilman interrupted. You serve at the pleasure of this community, and we are no longer pleased. Reed, seeing the tide turn decisively, slipped toward the edge of the crowd. Before he could escape, 2 deputies intercepted him. I believe we have questions for you, Mr. Reed, one said firmly, about your investigation methods and who exactly is paying for your services. Morning Star approached Eleanor, Thomas and Caleb, the wooden box still in her hands. This belongs to you now, she told Eleanor. I kept it safe, as I promised. Eleanor accepted the box reverently. Thank you seems inadequate for what you've done. You survived, Morning Star replied simply. You found your son. That is enough. As the crowd began to disperse, Judge Harmon stood isolated, his authority visibly crumbling. Martha Wilson approached Eleanor with tears in her eyes. I should have recognized it sooner, she said, looking between Eleanor and Thomas. The resemblance is so clear now. I didn't see it either, Eleanor admitted. Perhaps because I couldn't bear the hope. Pastor Williams joined them, holding the documents from the wooden box. These should be properly filed, he said, to establish Thomas's true identity and your rights as his mother. Eleanor nodded, then glanced toward Caleb. And what about, one step at a time, Martha advised gently. You've both been through enough for one day. The rest will come. As they walked away from the gallows, the instrument of death transformed into an unexpected pathway to reunion. Thomas kept his hand firmly in Eleanor's, as if afraid she might disappear again. On her other side, Caleb walked close, his presence a silent promise of protection and possibility. Behind them, the wooden box containing the evidence of their connected past rested securely in Martha's hands, the truth finally unveiled, a family's foundation restored. 3 days later, the town hall of Timberline Gulch was filled to capacity. Where there had once been a hasty trial, now a different kind of proceeding took place. The town council occupied the raised platform where Judge Harmon had presided, but the judge himself was conspicuously absent, having departed for Helena the previous day under escort, summoned to answer for his conduct before the territorial governor. At the center of the hall stood a weathered leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age, open to reveal the town's original charter signed by the first settlers decades earlier. The document had been retrieved from a locked cabinet in the judge's office, where it had languished largely forgotten until Martha Wilson had reminded the council of its existence. According to our founding charter, Councilman Wilson announced, the authority to govern Timberline Gulch rests with an elected council of 7, not with any single individual. Judge Harmon was appointed to interpret the law, not to become it. Eleanor sat with Thomas beside her, the boy's hand firmly clasped in hers. Caleb stood nearby, his presence a steady reassurance. The past days had been a whirlwind of revelations and adjustments, as mother and son cautiously rebuilt a relationship severed at birth. The first order of business, Councilman Wilson continued, is to formally withdraw all charges against Eleanor Pemberton and Caleb Stonewood. Seconded, another councilman called. All in favor. A chorus of ayes followed. The motion carries unanimously. Eleanor exhaled softly, the tension of years beginning to dissolve. Beside her, Thomas smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression she was still learning to treasure. Furthermore, Wilson continued, this council extends a formal apology for the miscarriage of justice that nearly occurred. He looked directly at Eleanor. No apology can undo what you've suffered, but we hope you can find it in your heart to remain part of our community. Before Eleanor could respond, Pastor William stood. If I may, there's another matter requiring attention. The Pinkerton detective, Reed, has provided a signed confession regarding his investigation. The pastor unfolded a document. Reed admits to being hired not by territorial authorities, but by Edward Pemberton, brother of the deceased. He was paid to find Eleanor and her child, and I quote, ensure neither would return to make claims against the estate. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reed has been sent to Helena with evidence of conspiracy, Pastor Williams concluded. The territorial prosecutor believes there are grounds to reopen the investigation into James Pemberton's death, with Edward Pemberton as a person of interest. What does this mean for Miss Blackwood, Mrs. Pemberton? Martha asked. It means, the pastor replied, that she is not only free of charges, but may have legitimate claims to the Pemberton estate on behalf of her son. Thomas looked up at his mother. Are we rich now? A ripple of laughter eased the tension in the room. We have something far more valuable than money. Eleanor told him softly. We have each other. Councilman Wilson cleared his throat. There's one final matter before us today. Our community has lacked proper leadership in matters of justice. We propose establishing a town council subcommittee to ensure fair treatment for all residents of Timberline Gulch, including our Apache neighbors. Running Bear, who had remained for the proceedings, nodded approvingly from the back of the hall. We'd like to nominate Martha Wilson to chair this committee, the councilman continued, with Pastor Williams, Eleanor Pemberton, and Running Bear as inaugural members. The motion passed with enthusiastic approval. As the formal proceedings concluded, townspeople approached Eleanor with congratulations and, in many cases, apologies for their earlier doubts. You must think us terrible, Mrs. Johnson said, her usual brusqueness softened by genuine remorse. I think people are often quick to judge what they don't understand, Eleanor replied, but also capable of remarkable compassion when given the chance. As the crowd thinned, Morning Star approached with White Dove, The elderly healer held out her hands to Thomas. "You walk in two worlds now, little one," she said. "Remember both." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I will. And you," Morning Star said to Eleanor, "have completed your journey. The circle is closed." "Not completed," Eleanor corrected gently. "Just beginning anew." Her gaze drifted to Caleb, who was deep in conversation with Running Bear. As if sensing her attention, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the room. Something unspoken passed between them. A question, perhaps, or a promise. Martha joined Eleanor, following her gaze. "That man moved heaven and earth to save you," she observed. "Broke out of jail, rallied the Apache, and revealed his nephew was actually your son, all in a single night." "He's a remarkable man," Eleanor agreed softly. "And not unhandsome," Martha added with a knowing smile. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Martha Wilson, are you matchmaking? Just observing what's plain as day to everyone but you two." Martha patted her hand. "Life's too short to waste, especially when you've been given a second chance at it." Later, as they left the town hall, Eleanor found Caleb waiting. Thomas ran ahead to where several school friends had gathered, eager to share his adventure now that the danger had passed. "I hear you've been appointed to bring justice to Timberline Gulch," Caleb said, falling into step beside her. "Ironic, given I was nearly its victim." She glanced at him. "Will you stay, now that everything's changed?" "Thomas is here," he said simply. "And now, so are you." "Is that the only reason?" she asked, her voice softer. Caleb stopped, turning to face her fully. "No," he admitted, "not the only reason." The charter that had redefined justice for Timberline Gulch lay forgotten on the town hall table. But outside, in the clear mountain air, something else was being redefined. The boundaries between two people who had found each other against impossible odds, connected first by a child neither knew they shared, and now by something entirely their own. Spring blossoms dotted the hillside where once a gallows had stood. 1 year had passed since the day Eleanor had nearly lost her life, and instead found her. Now the spot overlooked a transformed Timberline Gulch, its main street bustling with new growth as the mountain town flourished under more inclusive leadership. The small gathering assembled beneath an arch of woven pine branches and wildflowers. Eleanor stood in a simple cream dress, a crown of mountain blooms in her hair. Beside her, Caleb waited in a new buckskin jacket, his usually stern expression softened by a happiness few in town had ever witnessed before today. Thomas stood between them, proudly holding a braided cord of 3 colors, white, tan, and blue, woven by Morning Star for the ceremony. The intricate pattern represented the intertwining of separate lives into one family, each strand maintaining its individual strength while gaining new purpose in the union. "Friends," Pastor Williams began, addressing the intimate group of witnesses, "we gather not only to join Eleanor and Caleb in marriage, but to celebrate the official formation of a family that fate has woven together through extraordinary circumstances." Martha Wilson dabbed at her eyes, while Running Bear and Morning Star looked on with quiet satisfaction. Several of Eleanor's students giggled excitedly, delighted to see their teacher transformed into a bride. "Eleanor," the pastor continued, "do you take this man to be your husband, to honor his path while walking beside him on a shared journey?" "I do," Eleanor replied, her voice clear and certain. "Caleb, do you take this woman to be your wife, to honor her spirit while standing beside her through all seasons?" "I do," Caleb answered, the simple words carrying the weight of a promise long in forming. "And Thomas," Pastor Williams said, addressing the boy, "do you accept the sacred responsibility of being both son and bridge between these two who love you?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "I do." "Then bind them together," the pastor instructed. With careful concentration, Thomas wrapped the braided cord around his mother and Caleb's joined hands. "What has been joined in truth is now joined in name," Pastor Williams declared. "You are now husband and wife, and together with Thomas, a family recognized by both law and love." As Caleb kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the small gathering. Thomas beamed up at them, no longer the cautious, quiet boy of a year ago, but a child secure in belonging. Later, as guests celebrated at Martha's boarding house, Eleanor slipped away to the porch. The mountains stood majestic against the evening sky, their peaks still snow-capped, despite the valley's spring warmth. Caleb joined her, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Only good ones," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how much has changed." Indeed, the transformation extended beyond their personal happiness. The school had expanded, now welcoming Apache children alongside the town. Morning Star visited regularly to teach traditional medicine, her knowledge finally recognized as valuable. Judge Harmon's replacement, a thoughtful woman from Denver with formal legal training, consulted with the town council rather than ruling by decree. Most significant for Eleanor was the letter that had arrived from Helena 3 months earlier. Edward Pemberton had confessed to poisoning his brother after a territorial investigation had uncovered damning evidence. The Pemberton estate had been released from legal limbo, with Thomas named as rightful heir and Eleanor as trustee. "Mrs. Stonewood," Martha called from the doorway. "The photographer is ready for you." They returned inside to where an itinerant photographer had set up his equipment. The man adjusted his camera, positioning Eleanor, Caleb and Thomas before a backdrop of painted mountains. "Stand still now," he instructed, disappearing beneath the black cloth. Thomas fidgeted slightly until Caleb's hand settled on his shoulder. Eleanor reached for her son's other hand, completing the circle. "Perfect," the photographer declared. "A handsome family indeed." The flash powder ignited with a brief, brilliant flare. In that frozen moment, captured on the glass plate negative, was an image that would sit proudly on their mantle for decades to come. The first official portrait of the Stonewood family. As guests departed, and Thomas fell asleep upstairs in his room at the boarding house, Eleanor and Caleb lingered by the fire. Tomorrow they would move into their new home, built on Caleb's land, but closer to town, combining the wilderness he loved with the community she had helped transform. "I have something for you," Caleb said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object, wrapped in soft leather. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver pendant. Unlike the wooden mountain pendants Caleb's sister had carved for him and Thomas, this one was crafted of polished silver, its design incorporating 3 interlinked peaks. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Morning Star helped me design it. 3 mountains for the 3 of..." He took it from her hands and fastened it around her neck. A reminder that even the most solitary peaks are part of the same range. Eleanor touched the pendant, her eyes meeting his. "From the moment I arrived in Timberline Gulch, I was searching for my son. I never expected to find a husband as well. And I never expected a school teacher to upend everything I thought I knew about belonging," Caleb replied, drawing her closer. Outside, the last light faded from the mountains where they had once fled, as fugitives. Now those same peaks stood as silent witnesses to a journey completed and another just beginning, a family forged through loss and reunion, justice redefined through mercy, and love discovered in the most unlikely of circumstances. On the precise spot where Gallows had once stood, Caleb had planted a young aspen tree that morning. In time it would grow tall and strong, its leaves whispering in the mountain breeze, nature's reminder that even the darkest places can be transformed by hope, truth, and the enduring power of love.